This story explores themes of psychological distress, paranoia, and the unsettling nature of the unknown. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine for a moment that fleeting flicker, that shadow that isn't quite a shadow, the movement at the absolute edge of your vision that vanishes the instant you try to turn your head. We've all experienced it, haven't we? A trick of the light, a tired eye, a brain filling in the blanks. A harmless anomaly of perception. But what if it wasn't? What if that momentary glimpse, that elusive presence you can never quite pin down, was something real? Something that, for reasons you couldn't comprehend, chose to exist only in your peripheral vision, forever just out of reach, forever watching? This is the story of Michael Sterling, a man who once dismissed those fleeting moments as quirks of the mind, until the quirks began to coalesce, to solidify into something horrifyingly consistent, something that threatened to unravel the very fabric of his reality. Michael was a creature of habit and of the night. A research assistant at the vast, sprawling university library, his domain was the hushed, cavernous archive on the third floor, a labyrinth of forgotten texts and dusty manuscripts. He thrived in the quiet solitude, the late hours when the building creaked and settled around him like an ancient, slumbering beast. His work was meticulous, demanding a laser-like focus, cross-referencing obscure historical documents, digitizing fragile maps, unearthing forgotten footnotes from centuries past. It was a life of intellectual pursuit, far removed from the anxieties of the modern world. Or so he thought. It started subtly, as these things always do. A Tuesday night nearing midnight. Michael was hunched over a particularly brittle 17th-century ledger, its faded script a challenge even for his keen eyes. The only sound was the gentle hum of the old fluorescent lights overhead and the rustle of pages. He felt a slight shift in the air, a minute disturbance in the profound stillness of the archive. Then in the extreme corner of his right eye, a smear of darkness. Not a shadow, not a fly. More like an absence, a momentary blurring of the shelves filled with leather-bound books. He blinked, rubbing his eyes. Nothing. Just the rows of silent knowledge stretching into the dimness. Too much caffeine, he muttered to himself, dismissing it as a visual artifact of prolonged concentration. He went back to his ledger, his mind already forgetting the fleeting anomaly. A few nights later, the flicker returned. This time, he was making his rounds through the stacks, carefully reshelving a cart of returned texts. The aisle was long, narrow, and dimly lit, the kind of place where your own footsteps echoed a little too loudly. As he reached to place a heavy volume on a top shelf, his arm extended, he caught it again. A shape, low to the ground at the very edge of his left eye. Blacker than the shadows, a solid, squat form that seemed to absorb the ambient light rather than reflect it. It was gone before his head had even begun to turn. His heart gave a strange, lurching thump against his ribs. He froze, his hand still suspended in the air. He strained his eyes, peering into the gloom between the shelves. Nothing. Just the silent, waiting books. He told himself it was the way the old lights cast shadows, playing tricks on his tired vision. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound felt hollow in the vast silence. Over the next few weeks, these peripheral glimpses became a disturbing regularity. Not every night, but frequently enough to weave themselves into the fabric of his routine, creating a thread of unease he couldn't quite snip. It was always there, just out of direct sight. A fleeting distortion in the air, a patch of deeper darkness, a ripple in the visual field that felt unnatural. It never moved into his direct line of sight, never made a sound, never left any trace. It just was there. Then wasn't an instant. Michael shifted his gaze. He started to analyze the patterns. It seemed to appear most often when he was alone, when he was deeply focused on a task, his mind consumed by the minutiae of his work. When the environment was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The library, late at night, became a stage for this unsettling silent performance. He found himself unconsciously tensing, his shoulders hunching, his breath holding, waiting for the next appearance. He'd be meticulously cataloging a rare edition, his eyes fixed on the page, and there it would be, a dark, indistinct smudge at the edge of his vision, just for a fraction of a second, before dissolving into the background. Michael, a man of logic and reason, initially tried to apply scientific explanations. Optical illusions, floaters, mild migraines, stress, exhaustion. He even went to an optometrist, complaining of visual disturbances. The doctor found nothing amiss, assuring him his eyes were perfectly healthy. This only amplified his growing dread. If it wasn't his eyes, then what was it? His mind? The thought sent a cold dread through him. Michael had always prided himself on his mental clarity, his sharp intellect. The idea that his brain might be conjuring these phantom sightings, that he was slowly, imperceptibly losing his grip on reality was terrifying. He began to question everything. Was the dust motes dancing in the light? Or were they something else? Was that faint creak the old building settling? Or was it a subtle shift of something unseen? He found himself scanning the periphery of his vision constantly, a nervous tick. He would intentionally not look directly, trying to catch it in its natural state, to observe it without scaring it away. But it was impossible. The moment his conscious attention was directed, it vanished. His sleep became fractured, haunted by vague, unsettling dreams he couldn't quite recall, but which left him feeling drained and anxious upon waking. He'd wake up in the dead of night, his heart pounding, convinced he'd seen something in the dark of his bedroom, just at the edge of his pillow. He started leaving a small lamp on. The constant vigilance, the internal battle between logic and encroaching paranoia, began to wear him down. He felt isolated, trapped in a silent, invisible war with his own perception. How could he tell anyone? I keep seeing something in my peripheral vision, but it disappears when I look directly at it. He could already hear the sympathetic, pitying tones, the suggestions of therapy, the quiet concern. He was a professional and academic. He couldn't afford to be seen as unstable. One particularly long and lonely night, deep in the archive, Michael was attempting to decipher a particularly challenging piece of medieval Latin. The silence was so profound it felt heavy pressing down on him. He felt utterly alone yet profoundly watched. He was focused, his brow furrowed, when it happened again. This time it was different, more distinct. A tall, slender column of absolute blackness, taller than the bookshelves, seemed to materialize at the far end of the aisle he was working in, just beyond a tall rolling ladder. It wasn't just a blur or a smudge. It had a presence. It reached from the floor almost to the ceiling, a stark, profound void against the muted backdrop of ancient books. And then, at its upper end, almost like a cap, a faint, almost imperceptible curve. Michael's breath hitched. His eyes, though fixed on the page, were straining at the edges, trying to absorb every detail of this impossible sight. He felt a primal, gut-wrenching fear, an instinctual recoil. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't exhaustion. This was there. And it was undeniably, terrifyingly real. His hands trembled, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He dropped the heavy leather-bound book he was holding. It hit the polished wooden floor with a deafening thud that echoed through the silent archive, shattering the oppressive stillness. And in that instant, as the sound reverberated, and Michael snapped his head up, eyes wide with terror, the towering, impossibly black column was gone. Nothing but the silent, empty aisle, stretching into the dimness. But the fear, cold and sharp, remained. It was no longer a question of his sanity. It was a question of what else was sharing the quiet, lonely spaces of his world, and what it wanted. The grocery store's fluorescent hum seemed to mock him as Michael stumbled out, the biting night air doing little to clear the fog of dread that had settled deep in his bones. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the terrifying certainty that had just solidified within him. It wasn't his mind playing tricks. It wasn't fatigue or stress, or a momentary lapse in perception. There was something there. Something that moved just beyond the direct gaze. A shadow with substance, a presence that radiated an unnerving cold. The world, which moments ago had been predictable and mundane, was now fractured, tainted by an invisible threat that seemed to cling to the very edges of his vision. He fumbled with his car keys, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped them. The drive home was a blur of flashing streetlights and phantom movements in his rearview mirror, each flicker of light or distant shadow sending a jolt of panic through him. He checked his side mirrors, his blind spots, convinced that at any moment, that formless dark shape would materialize, bold and undeniable, right beside him. But it never did. It remained elusive, a silent hunter in the periphery. He burst through his front door, slamming it shut and locking it with a desperate click. The familiar comforts of his apartment, the worn sofa, the stack of books on the coffee table, the half-eaten pizza box from dinner, offered no solace. Every shadow seemed to deepen, Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps. He paced, adrenaline coursing through him, his mind racing. He tried to rationalize it, to force himself back into the skeptical mindset he'd always prided himself on. Maybe he needed glasses. Maybe he was coming down with something. Maybe he was just incredibly, catastrophically tired. He even pulled out his phone, searching for articles on optical illusions, visual anomalies, even neurological conditions. He scrolled through forums, seeking any explanation that didn't involve a spectral entity stalking him. But none of it fit. The sheer presence of it, the specific, unsettling way it moved, the cold dread it instilled, it was too vivid, too consistent to be dismissed by medical terminology or scientific explanations. His rational mind had a new, terrifying framework, one forged in the chilling reality of what he had just experienced. Sleep was impossible. He spent the night huddled on his sofa, the television playing a low, meaningless drone, his eyes darting to every corner of the room, every dark space where the light didn't quite reach. He felt watched, intensely, profoundly watched, even when nothing was there. The silence of his apartment had never felt so heavy, so pregnant with unspoken dread. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in a weak, watery gray, it brought little relief. The creature was gone, or at least unseen, but the memory of its presence, the fear it invoked, was a raw, aching wound. He went through the motions of his morning routine in a haze, the simple act of making coffee feeling monumental. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself. The weight of it was too immense, too isolating. He needed to talk to someone who knew him, someone who would listen without immediately dismissing him as delusional. His first call was to David, his oldest friend, a man known for his unflappable calm and pragmatic outlook. Michael chose to meet him at their usual coffee shop, hoping the familiar setting and the bustling normalcy of the world outside would somehow ground his increasingly fractured reality. He spoke haltingly at first, detailing the initial sightings, the growing frequency, the chilling sensation of being watched, culminating in the terror of the grocery store aisle. David listened patiently, his brow furrowed with concern, stirring his coffee slowly. When Michael finally finished, the silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "Michael," David began, his voice gentle, "I know you've been under a lot of stress lately. Work, right? And you haven't been sleeping well." Michael shook his head, frustration bubbling. "It's not stress, David. It's real. I saw it. I felt it." David sighed. "Look, I'm not saying you didn't experience something, but maybe it's your mind playing tricks on you, you know? Hallucinations can be incredibly vivid when you're exhausted. Have you thought about seeing a doctor? Just to rule out anything physical, or maybe a therapist to help with the stress?" The suggestion, though well-intentioned, felt like a punch to the gut. David, his closest friend, dismissed it as a mental breakdown. Michael felt a profound sense of isolation wash over him. How could he explain the undeniable reality of what he was experiencing when even those closest to him couldn't grasp it? He left the coffee shop feeling more alone than ever, the outside world suddenly seeming even more indifferent, even more menacing. If David couldn't believe him, who would? This wasn't some campfire ghost story. This was his life unraveling at the seams. The creature, whatever it was, had not only invaded his personal space, but had now begun to erode his connections to the sane world. He spent the rest of the day in a desperate, frantic search for answers. He scoured obscure corners of the internet, delving into forums dedicated to the paranormal, cryptids, shadow people, anything that remotely resembled his experience. He found fragmented accounts, whispered anxieties, terrifyingly similar descriptions of dark, elusive figures seen only in the periphery, accompanied by feelings of intense dread and cold. But there were no solutions, no explanations, only more questions and a growing sense of shared, unsettling terror. The next encounter was different, more brazen. Michael was at home trying to read to distract himself, but his focus was shattered. He kept glancing up, constantly scanning the room. He felt a distinct chill, a sudden drop in temperature, even though the windows were closed and the heating was on. He shivered, pulling his sweater tighter. He was staring at the page, trying to concentrate on the words, when a movement caught the extreme edge of his right eye. He didn't turn his head immediately this time. He couldn't. A paralyzing fear held him captive. He kept his eyes fixed on the book, but his peripheral vision swam with the dark, indistinct form. It was taller this time, or perhaps closer. It seemed to occupy more space, a blotch of pure shadow against the wall, just at the very limit of what he could see without directly looking. It wasn't just a flicker, it lingered. A cold dread seeped into him, chilling him to the bone, a sensation far more profound than the mere drop in air temperature. It felt like an oppressive weight, a silent, malevolent observation. He could feel its presence, a palpable, suffocating awareness that it was there, watching him. He could almost discern an outline, a wavering, inhuman shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. His breath hitched in his throat. He wanted to scream, to run, but he was frozen, trapped by the terrifying logic that if he looked directly, it would vanish. And if it vanished, he would be left with only the crushing doubt, the horrifying question of whether he was truly losing his mind. So he held his gaze, fixed on the meaningless words on the page, his peripheral vision screaming at him. The shadow seemed to pulsate, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in its form, like a thing breathing in the dark. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to brush against the edges of his hearing, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or perhaps just the blood rushing in his ears. It was too soft to be real, yet too distinct to be ignored. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the pressure eased. The chill receded. The shadow, without a single movement, was simply gone. Michael gasped, a ragged, desperate sound, finally tearing his eyes from the book. The corner of the room was empty, bathed in the soft glow of his reading lamp. Nothing, not a trace, but the lingering cold, the phantom whisper, and the undeniable memory of that extended, silent vigil, left him shattered. This wasn't just a fleeting glimpse anymore. This was a sustained presence, a deliberate act of observation. It was learning his patterns, growing bolder, pushing the boundaries of its elusive nature. Michael was no longer just seeing things, he was being stalked. The creature wasn't just a figment. It was an entity, intelligent and patient, slowly but surely tightening its grip on his reality. He was alone, utterly and terrifyingly alone, in a world that now held a hidden, predatory dimension, and he knew with a certainty that turned his blood to ice, that it was only a matter of time before it chose to step fully into the light. The world as Michael knew it had fractured. The certainty that this unseen entity was real, that it resided just beyond the threshold of his direct perception, was a poison seeping into every corner of his mind. Sleep became a battlefield, his dreams a chaotic montage of fleeting shadows and the suffocating weight of unseen eyes. He would jolt awake, heart hammering against his ribs, convinced he'd seen it in the darkened corner of his bedroom, only for the space to be empty when he snapped his gaze towards it. The exhaustion was profound, a constant, dull ache behind his eyes, but the fear was an electric current, keeping him perpetually on edge. He tried, desperately, to rationalize it away. Stress, he told himself. Too much coffee, not enough sleep, an overactive imagination fueled by late-night thrillers. He even scheduled an appointment with his doctor, Dr. Peterson, citing chronic fatigue and anxiety. Dr. Peterson, a kind, middle-aged man with a reassuring demeanor, ran a battery of tests, found nothing physically amiss, and gently suggested a therapist. Michael nodded, feigned agreement, but he knew therapy couldn't cure what he was experiencing. How could he explain to a therapist that he was being stalked by a creature that only existed in his peripheral vision? They'd think he was delusional, paranoid. He was already starting to feel that way himself. The incidents escalated, subtly at first, then with an unnerving frequency. It wasn't just in his apartment anymore. He saw it at work, a flicker of movement by the water cooler, a shift in the shadows beneath a colleague's desk. He'd be engrossed in a spreadsheet, his focus absolute, when a dark smear would cross the edge of his vision, making his stomach clench. He'd whip his head around, and there would be nothing but the mundane reality of cubicles and fluorescent lights. His productivity plummeted. His boss, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, called him into her office, her brow furrowed with concern. She spoke of missed deadlines and a noticeable drop in his usual meticulousness. Michael mumbled excuses about personal stress, avoiding her gaze, terrified she might see the frantic energy simmering beneath his skin. His social life, once vibrant, began to wither. He canceled plans with friends, preferring the isolated terror of his own apartment to the risk of exposure in public. He imagined the creature following him, a silent, invisible parasite feeding on his fear. He'd be at a coffee shop trying to read, when the distinct sensation of being watched would prickle the hairs on his neck. He'd glance up, scanning the faces around him, a young couple laughing, a student hunched over a laptop, an elderly woman knitting, all oblivious, all normal. But the feeling wouldn't leave, a cold knot in his gut, a certainty that it was there somewhere just beyond his direct sight, observing him. One evening he was cooking dinner, a simple pasta dish, trying to recreate a semblance of normalcy. The radio was playing soft jazz, the aroma of garlic and herbs filled his small kitchen. He reached for a spice jar on the top shelf, his back momentarily turned to the living room. As he stretched, a distinct metallic clang echoed from the living room. It sounded like something had fallen. He froze, his hand still suspended in the air. He slowly, deliberately turned his head. His gaze swept across the living room. Nothing. The coffee table was clear, the books on the shelf undisturbed. He walked cautiously into the room, his eyes darting, searching. Then he saw it. His favorite ceramic mug, the one his sister Emily had given him, lay shattered on the hardwood floor, a few feet from the edge of the rug. It had been sitting securely on the mantelpiece, far from any vibration or draft. Michael felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't seen it fall, hadn't seen anything. But the mug hadn't just fallen. It had been pushed. He spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance, his senses screaming. He started leaving lights on, even when he left the room, a futile attempt to scare away what he knew couldn't be deterred by light. He installed cheap security cameras in his apartment, pointing them at every corner, hoping to catch a glimpse, a shadow, anything that would confirm his sanity, or at least provide tangible proof of his tormentor. He reviewed the footage hours later, his eyes burning with exhaustion. Nothing. Just empty rooms, the mundane passage of time, and the occasional flicker of his own anxious movements. The creature, it seemed, was too clever or perhaps too fundamentally different to be captured by human technology. Desperate for answers, he began to scour the internet. He typed in vague, frantic searches. Shadows in peripheral vision. Feeling watched by unseen entity. Creature only visible indirectly. He delved into forums dedicated to the paranormal, into forgotten folklore, into psychological treatises on pareidolia and optical illusions. He found stories, hundreds of them, of people seeing things out of the corner of their eye, fleeting shapes, dark figures that vanished when looked at directly. Most were dismissed as sleep deprivation, anxiety, or mental illness. But some were chillingly similar to his own experience. Accounts of a pervasive dread, a cold presence, the unsettling feeling that something was observing them, learning them. He found no names, no concrete descriptions, just a shared, terrifying whisper of something ancient and predatory that thrived in the blind spots of human perception. One particular thread caught his attention, buried deep within an obscure paranormal forum. It was a cryptic post from years ago, written by someone named Watcher_77. The user described an entity that fed on the unacknowledged, that grew stronger with every glance averted, every fear suppressed. It spoke of the creature's ability to manipulate the edges of reality, to bend the unseen world to its will. Michael felt a cold dread settle over him. Fed on the unacknowledged. That phrase resonated with a terrifying truth. The more he tried to ignore it, to dismiss it, the bolder it seemed to become. The creature's apparitions grew more substantial, less like a smear, more like a form. He would catch glimpses of what looked like a limb, impossibly long and spindly, retracting into the shadows, or a head, featureless and dark, tilting slightly as if in curiosity before dissolving. He was driving home one night, the city lights a blur outside his window, when he saw it in his rearview mirror. Not behind his car, but in the back seat, just behind his head, a hunched dark mass. His breath hitched. He slammed on the brakes, swerving slightly, his eyes locked on the mirror. The moment the car jolted, the shape vanished. He pulled over to the side of the road, heart pounding, sweat trickling down his spine. He couldn't shake the image. It wasn't just a flicker anymore. It was there. It was getting closer. He started carrying a small, powerful flashlight everywhere he went, a desperate, irrational defense. He'd snap it on whenever he felt the familiar prickle of being watched, sweeping the beam into empty corners, under tables, behind doors. It never revealed anything, but the act itself, the futile gesture of defiance, offered a fleeting, fragile sense of control. The creature's presence wasn't just visual now. He started to hear things, faint whispers just beyond the range of comprehension, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or the distant murmur of a crowd. They were always just outside his direct hearing, fading the moment he focused on them. And the cold, A sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature in certain areas of his apartment, particularly around his bed at night. He'd wake up shivering, even with the heat on full blast, a chilling reminder that he was not alone. Michael was a prisoner in his own home, in his own mind. The peripheral vision, once an innocuous part of his perception, had become a gateway to pure terror. He felt constantly hunted, relentlessly observed. He knew with a chilling certainty that the creature wasn't just watching him anymore. It was actively experimenting, pushing the boundaries, testing his resolve. It was learning how close it could get, how much fear it could extract, before finally, inevitably, stepping fully into his direct line of sight. And then one morning he woke up to find something new, something that chilled him to his core, confirming his deepest fears. On his bedside table, neatly placed beside his phone, was a single perfectly preserved, dried rose petal. He had no roses in his apartment. He hadn't bought flowers in months, and the window was securely locked. The creature wasn't just observing, it was leaving him gifts. His breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. Michael stared at the delicate crimson fragment, a stark contrast to the sterile gleam of his phone screen. A dried rose petal, perfectly preserved. His mind raced, grasping for any logical explanation. Had a friend been over? No, not in weeks. Had he bought flowers and forgotten? Absolutely not. He detested cut flowers. They felt like a slow death in a vase. His apartment had been a flower-free zone for years. The window. He spun around, his eyes locking onto the glass pane. It was still latched, the small metal mechanism firmly engaged. He checked it meticulously every night since the first unsettling glimpse of the creature. He even had a small, almost imperceptible scratch he'd made on the frame as a personal paranoid marker. It was undisturbed. This wasn't just observation anymore. This was a breach. The creature wasn't merely watching from the shadows outside. It had been inside his sanctuary. His home, the one place he felt even a semblance of safety, had been violated. A wave of nausea washed over him, colder and more potent than any fear he'd felt before. This wasn't a prank. No human could have done this without leaving a trace, without forcing the lock. And the creature, it wasn't human. He felt a primal urge to scream, to tear his apartment apart looking for an intruder, but a chilling stillness held him captive. The silence in the room suddenly felt oppressive, heavy with an unseen presence. He wasn't alone. He hadn't been alone for who knew how long. The rose petal wasn't a gift. It was a calling card, a declaration of intent. It was a message that said, "I am here. I can be anywhere." Michael spent the next hour in a frantic, silent search, every nerve screaming. He checked every closet, every nook under the bed, behind the shower curtain. His hands trembled as he opened cabinets, peering into the shadows, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back. He found nothing. No broken locks, no disturbed dust, no sign of forced entry. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it, pristine and undisturbed, save for the single, impossible rose petal still resting by his phone. He scooped it up, the brittle edges feeling strangely warm against his fingertips. It was real. Too real. Sleep was a distant, mocking concept. He sat on his couch, a blanket wrapped tightly around him despite the mild night air. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind against the window, sent a jolt of ice through him. He imagined it lurking just beyond his sight, a silent, formless shadow in the periphery of his own apartment. Was it behind the armchair? Under the coffee table? Was it watching him right now, its strange, elongated form pressed against the ceiling, observing his terror? He tried to rationalize, to break the impossible down into manageable pieces. Maybe he'd accidentally picked it up somewhere? No, he was meticulously clean. Maybe it had blown in through a tiny crack he hadn't noticed? Impossible, the petal was too perfect, too deliberately placed. It was an offering, a warning, or something far more sinister. The most terrifying thought was that it had been doing this for a while. How many times had it entered his apartment, moved silently through his space, while he slept, oblivious? Had it stood over his bed, its strange shifting form casting an unseen shadow? The thought made his skin crawl, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. The creature wasn't just a fleeting glimpse anymore. It was an active participant in his life, weaving itself into the fabric of his reality, slowly, subtly, like a poison. He knew he couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? "Officer, there's a shadowy creature that moves in my peripheral vision, and it just left a dried rose petal in my locked apartment." He'd be laughed out of the station, probably referred to a psychiatrist. His friends Sarah and David would worry, offer sympathy, but ultimately dismiss it as stress, as a vivid nightmare. He was alone in this, utterly and terrifyingly alone. The next few days blurred into a waking nightmare. Michael became a prisoner in his own home. He barely left, venturing out only for necessities, always rushing back, his eyes darting, his senses on high alert. He installed motion-activated cameras, cheap ones from a big box store, pointing them at every entrance, every window. He set up tripwires of fishing line across doorways, hoping to catch even the slightest disturbance. He even sprinkled flour lightly on his floorboards in front of the windows, a desperate, almost childlike attempt to detect footprints. Every morning he checked the camera footage. Nothing. No alerts, no movement. Every morning the flour lay undisturbed. Every morning his heart sank deeper into a pit of despair. It was either impossibly stealthy, or it wasn't entering the way he expected, or it was already in. The paranoia was relentless. He started hearing things, faint skittering sounds from the attic, soft thumps from the basement, a barely perceptible rustle that seemed to come from inside his walls. He'd jump up, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across empty rooms, his breath catching in his throat. He saw it everywhere now, even when it wasn't there. A flicker in the corner of his eye as he walked into the kitchen, a shadow that seemed to elongate just as he turned his head, a sense of being watched from behind the shower curtain. He knew it was his mind playing tricks, exacerbating the terror, but the feeling was no less real. He stopped sleeping in his bed, opting for the couch, where he could face the main door and the windows. He kept a heavy wrench beside him, a pathetic comfort against an unknown, unknowable entity. His phone was always clutched in his hand, ready to call for help, though he had no idea what kind of help he'd even ask for. One evening, a week after the rose petal incident, Michael was meticulously cleaning his kitchen, scrubbing the countertops with a ferocity born of nervous energy. He needed to feel in control of something. He'd put away the last plate, wiped down the sink, and was about to turn off the light when something caught his eye. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a change so minor he nearly dismissed it as fatigue. On the small magnetic strip where he kept his knives, neatly arranged by size, there was a gap. The smallest paring knife, the one he used for peeling fruit, was missing. His blood ran cold. He knew with absolute certainty that he had placed it there after washing. He was obsessive about his knives. He reached out, his fingers tracing the empty magnetic space. It wasn't on the counter. It wasn't in the sink. He checked the dishwasher, the drawers, frantically tearing through his kitchen. Nothing. The wrench slipped from his hand, clattering loudly on the tile floor. This wasn't a rose petal. This wasn't a subtle calling card. This was a tool. His tool. And it was gone. The creature wasn't just leaving gifts. It was taking things. And the implications of a creature that could move silently through his locked apartment, that left impossible tokens, now also taking a sharp object, sent a fresh wave of terror through him. What did it need a paring knife for? And more importantly, where was it now? Was it still in the apartment? Was it watching him, holding his own knife, waiting for the perfect moment? The air grew heavy, thick with unseen menace, and Michael felt a chilling certainty that the creature wasn't playing games anymore. It was escalating, and it was just getting started. Michael's breath hitched. A strangled sound caught in his throat. The creature had a knife. His own knife. The realization hit him like a physical blow, stripping away any last vestiges of doubt about his sanity. This wasn't a trick of the light, not a figment of his stressed imagination. This was real. This was a violation. He didn't hesitate. Adrenaline surged, a cold, electric current through his veins. He didn't run, didn't scream. He moved. His hand shot out, grabbing the heavy, cast-iron skillet from its hook above the stove. It was clumsy, unwieldy, but it was something. His knuckles were white as he gripped the handle, his gaze sweeping frantically across the kitchen, then the living room, every shadow a potential hiding place, every creak of the old house a potential threat. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. It was a watchful, predatory silence, the kind that precedes a pounce. Michael's ears strained, trying to decipher the subtle nuances of his own home. Was that a floorboard groaning upstairs? A faint rustle from the hallway? Or was it just his blood roaring in his ears? His imagination running wild in the face of such stark, undeniable terror? He moved slowly, deliberately, the skillet held before him like a shield. Every step was a monumental effort, every breath shallow and ragged. He checked the back door, locked, the windows all secured, but the feeling of being watched intensified, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck that made him want to spin around, to catch whatever it was just once fully in his sight. But he knew with a horrifying certainty that he wouldn't. It would always be there, just at the edge, a phantom of the periphery. He crept towards the hallway, the only path to the rest of the house. The air grew colder here, a damp chill that permeated his skin. His eyes darted from side to side, scanning the framed photos on the wall. Joyful memories of vacations, family gatherings, all now tainted by the creeping dread. He saw his reflection briefly in the glass of one picture, a wild-eyed, desperate man he barely recognized. As he reached the end of the hall, he paused, listening. Nothing, just the frantic beat of his own heart. He pushed open the door to the small guest bathroom, skillet raised, ready to swing. Empty. The shower curtain was drawn, casting a long, deep shadow within the tub. He snatched it back. Nothing. Just the porcelain gleam of the empty tub. He checked under the sink behind the toilet. Still nothing. The meticulous search was both a desperate act and a delaying tactic, an attempt to assert some control over a situation that felt utterly out of his hands. Moving on, he approached his study. The door was slightly ajar. He always closed it. Always. A fresh wave of icy fear washed over him. This wasn't just a random intruder. This was something that knew his habits, his routines. He pushed the door open with the tip of the skillet, peering into the gloom. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. His desk, usually a neat stack of papers and books, was undisturbed. His computer screen was black, a silent mirror. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning every inch. And then he saw it. On his desk, next to his keyboard, sat a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was a gift from Sarah, a souvenir from their honeymoon, usually kept on a shelf in the living room. It was now here, perfectly centered, almost like an offering. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. Around the bird, meticulously placed, were tiny, almost microscopic shards of what looked like dried leaves and twigs, arranged in a crude, unsettling spiral. It was a pattern, a symbol that screamed intent. It was a message. He took a shaky step back, his gaze fixed on the disturbing tableau. It was too precise, too deliberate. The creature wasn't just lurking. It was making its presence known in ways that were designed to unravel him, piece by agonizing piece. It was playing a game, and Michael was the unwilling pawn. He spun around, his peripheral vision catching a flicker of movement by the study door. A fleeting shadow that melted back into the darkness before he could fully register it. A gasp escaped his lips, and he swung the skillet wildly, hitting nothing but air. The metallic clang echoed in the small room, deafening in the oppressive silence. He was alone. Or was he? His mind raced, trying to find a pattern, a logic to this madness. He tried to rationalize, to find a mundane explanation for the displaced object, the strange arrangement of debris. But the chill in the air, the undeniable feeling of an unseen presence, the memory of the knife, it all coalesced into a terrifying certainty. This was deliberate. This was personal. He backed out of the study, his eyes never leaving the doorway, as if expecting the shadow to coalesce into a solid form. He needed to get out, or he needed to call for help. He fumbled for his phone in his pocket, his fingers trembling. He pulled it out, thumb hovering over the emergency dial. But then he hesitated. What would he say? There's a creature in my house that only I can see clearly, and it's leaving me weird messages and might have my knife? They think he was insane. Or worse, they wouldn't believe him until it was too late. The thought of explaining this, of sounding utterly delusional, paralyzed him. He knew deep down that this creature wasn't just about fear. It was about isolation. It wanted him alone, unraveling. He decided to check the bedrooms. His own bedroom, then the spare. He crept up the stairs, the old wood groaning under his weight, each creak amplified in the silence. He reached the landing, his heart thumping against his ribs. The door to his and Sarah's bedroom was slightly ajar. Just like the study, he pushed it open slowly, the skillet held high. The room was bathed in moonlight, casting long, eerie shadows. The bed was unmade, just as they'd left it that morning. Nothing seemed out of place. He scanned the room, his eyes darting to every corner, every piece of furniture. His gaze fell on his nightstand. There, on the polished wood surface, next to the lamp, was a small framed photograph. It was a picture of him and Sarah from their wedding day, a cherished memory. But it wasn't the photo itself that made his stomach clench. It was what was on it. A single crimson-red rose petal lay perfectly centered on Sarah's smiling face in the photograph. It was vibrant, impossibly fresh, a stark, violent burst of color against the faded tones of the picture. And it wasn't just any rose. It was the exact shade of rose that Sarah had carried in her wedding bouquet. Michael felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This wasn't just a violation of his home. It was a violation of his most intimate memories, his love, his very sense of security. The creature knew about Sarah. It knew about their wedding. It was digging into his life, twisting his most precious moments into instruments of terror. He felt a cold, dry breath against the back of his neck, so subtle he almost dismissed it as a trick of his mind. But it was there, distinct and chilling. He froze, every muscle tensed, unable to move, unable to breathe. He could feel its presence, closer than ever before, just behind him, just out of his direct line of sight. He could almost hear the whisper of its form, the faint, almost imperceptible shift of air as it stood there, watching him, relishing his terror. He slowly, painstakingly began to turn, his eyes wide with a desperate, primal fear. He had to see it. He had to. But as he began to pivot, a faint, almost imperceptible glint of moonlight caught something in his peripheral vision, something metallic, sharp, and unmistakably familiar. It was the flash of a blade, his own blade held steady just beyond the edge of his sight. It wasn't just watching him, it was waiting. And Michael knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that this game of cat and mouse had just entered a new, far more dangerous phase. The creature was no longer content to simply observe. It was ready to make its move. The air in the house grew heavy, thick with an unspoken promise of impending confrontation. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that had suddenly become deafening. He stood frozen in the living room, every nerve ending screaming, his eyes darting frantically, not just into the periphery, but directly into the deepening shadows of his own home. He knew it was there, watching, waiting, no longer content with its silent game. A low guttural thrum vibrated through the floorboards, not a sound he could pinpoint, but a sensation that crawled up his spine. It was like the house itself was groaning, a living entity preparing to swallow him whole. Then the lights flickered, not just once but in quick, erratic bursts, plunging the room into near darkness before snapping back on, only to dim again. Each flicker was accompanied by a subtle shift, a fleeting impression of movement in the corners of his vision, faster than he could track. Was it showing itself? Taunting him? Michael backed away slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy iron poker by the fireplace. It was a flimsy defense, he knew, against something that defied explanation, but the cold metal in his grip offered a sliver of desperate comfort. He needed to get out. That was his only thought. Escape. He lunged for the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt. His fingers, slick with sweat, struggled against the mechanism, felt stiff as if jammed. He twisted, pulled, pushed, his panic mounting. The door wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside, or perhaps from within, by something far more formidable than a simple latch. He tried the back door, then the sliding glass door leading to the patio. Each one was inexplicably sealed, unyielding. The windows, too, felt strangely resistant, as though the glass had fused with the frames. He was trapped. A cold dread seeped into him, colder than any fear he had ever known. This wasn't just a creature haunting his house. It was using his house against him. The walls seemed to press in, the familiar comfort of his home transforming into a suffocating cage. He spun around, searching. The flickering lights intensified, creating strobe-like effects that distorted the familiar furniture, turning everyday objects into monstrous silhouettes. He saw it then, not in the periphery but directly ahead for a fraction of a second, as the lights flared then died almost completely. It was a distortion in the air, a ripple in reality itself directly across the room, taller than a man, impossibly thin, and yet it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. A void, a tear in the fabric of existence, with just enough shape to suggest limbs, a head, a terrifying silent presence. And then as the lights returned, it was gone. Michael stumbled backward, collapsing onto the sofa, gasping for breath. His mind reeled. It was real. More real than he could have ever imagined. Not a trick of the light, not a delusion. A physical, terrifying entity that could manipulate its surroundings. He needed answers. Not just escape, but understanding. Why him? Why this house? He remembered the strange, almost ritualistic arrangement of the broken objects in the attic, the inexplicable cold spots, the sense of being watched. There had to be a pattern, a reason. Driven by a desperate impulse, he scrambled up and headed for the study, a small room at the back of the house he rarely used, filled with dusty old books and forgotten paperwork from the previous owners. He remembered seeing a heavy, leather-bound journal tucked away on a shelf there years ago, something he'd meant to look at but never had. Now it felt like his only lead. The study was darker than the other rooms, the single window obscured by overgrown ivy. He flipped the light switch repeatedly, but nothing happened. The creature, it seemed, was selectively cutting off his access to light, forcing him into its preferred domain of shadows. He pulled out his phone, its flashlight beam a weak but vital lifeline in the oppressive gloom. He scanned the shelves, dust motes dancing in the narrow beam. There it was, wedged between a collection of antique maps and a brittle volume on local history. A thick, dark brown leather journal, its cover worn smooth with age, no title, no author. He pulled it free, the leather surprisingly cool against his fingertips. He carried it to the small desk in the center of the room, shining his phone's light onto its pages. The script was an elegant, flowing cursive slightly faded with time. The first few entries were mundane, detailing weather patterns, garden notes, and local gossip. But then the tone shifted. The entries grew shorter, more frantic, the handwriting less steady. Asterisk October 17th, 1958 asterisk. The shadows deepen earlier each day. I see it now more clearly in the edges of my sight. A flicker, a movement where there should be none. It watches from the periphery. Always the periphery. Michael's blood ran cold. This wasn't a coincidence. This was another victim, another observer long before him. Asterisk November 3rd, 1958 asterisk. It moves objects now. Small things. A teacup shifted. A book fallen from the shelf. It's testing, probing, trying to make itself known, yet remaining unseen. It wants to be acknowledged, but on its own terms. He remembered the teacup, the book in his own experience. The creature was following a pattern. It wasn't random. Asterisk November 19th, 1958 asterisk. I tried to speak to it, to acknowledge its presence. I regret it. It reacted. The cold, the whispers. It wants more than acknowledgement. It wants access. Access. What kind of access? Michael's mind raced. Was it trying to cross some barrier? To fully manifest? Asterisk December 1st, 1958 asterisk. It is stronger now. The house itself feels alive with its presence. Doors lock. Windows seal. It traps me here. Not to harm me, not yet, but to force me to see. To witness. Feeds on the observation. The fear. The knowing. This was it. This was exactly what was happening to him. The journal was a chilling mirror of his own experience, separated by decades. The previous owner, a woman named Eleanor Vance, had documented every terrifying step of the creature's progression. He flipped through more pages, the entries becoming increasingly disjointed, filled with frantic sketches of impossible geometries and symbols he didn't recognize. Then he found a section that made his heart leap into his throat. Asterisk January 10th, 1959 asterisk. It seeks the binding, the anchor, the place where the veil is thinnest. It is drawn to those who are sensitive, those who can perceive beyond the ordinary. My lineage, my great-grandmother spoke of it. A family curse, she called it. A guardian of the threshold, forever bound to this land, this house. But it has grown hungry. It wants to cross fully. Asterisk January 25th, 1959 asterisk. The binding. It's not a physical object, not truly. It's a point, a confluence of energy, and it needs a conduit, a living anchor. It has always been here in the shadows, but now, it demands more. It demands a sacrifice of perception. To see it fully is to invite it in. A living anchor? A conduit? What did that mean? And a sacrifice of perception? To see it fully was to invite it in? Michael shivered, a cold realization dawning on him. He had been trying so hard to see it, to understand it. Was that exactly what it wanted? Was his curiosity, his desperate need for answers, playing right into its hands? He continued reading, his fingers tracing the frantic lines. Eleanor had begun to research ancient folklore, occult texts, anything that might explain the entity. She had found references to similar entities, shadow beings that existed on the fringes of perception, feeding on the subconscious recognition of their existence. They were drawn to places where the barrier between worlds was weak, and to individuals who, through some innate sensitivity or prolonged exposure, inadvertently thinned that barrier further. February 12, 1959 I found it. The place. Not in the house but beneath it. A forgotten cellar, a root cellar beneath the old pantry. The threshold my great-grandmother spoke of. It's there beneath the floorboards. That's where it truly resides. Beneath the house? A forgotten cellar? Michael remembered the old pantry, a small, unused room off the kitchen. He'd always assumed it was just a storage space, the floor solid concrete. But Eleanor's entry suggested otherwise. February 28, 1959 It's trying to communicate in its own way. Through the dreams. Through the whispers. It shows me fragments. A ritual. A key. Not a physical key but a method. A way to open the door or to seal it forever. It needs a focus. A focus. What kind of focus? The journal abruptly ended on that page, the very next one blank. Eleanor Vance's story simply stopped. Michael stared at the last entry, a terrifying emptiness blooming in his chest. What had happened to her? Had she found the focus? Had she succeeded in sealing it? Or had she become the living anchor, the conduit? The phone in his hand flickered, its battery icon showing critically low. The light beam dimmed, casting longer, more grotesque shadows around the study. He was almost out of time, out of light, and still he had no clear answers, only more terrifying questions. He had learned the creature's name, or at least its nature. A guardian of the threshold, hungry for full manifestation. He had learned its method. Manipulating perception, trapping its prey, driving them to acknowledge it fully. And he had learned its goal. A living anchor, a conduit, a focus. A sudden sharp crack echoed from the floorboards below him. Not from the study floor but from deeper beneath the house. A sound of splintering wood, followed by a faint rhythmic scraping. It was coming from the direction of the old pantry. The creature was making its move, no longer content to wait. It was trying to reach the threshold, and Michael knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that he was the only thing standing in its way, or perhaps the very thing it needed to complete its purpose. The creature was no longer content to simply observe. It was ready to claim its focus. The creature was no longer content to simply observe. It was ready to claim its focus. The certainty of it was a physical blow, knocking the breath from Michael's lungs. He stumbled back, his eyes darting around the dim living room, not daring to settle on any one spot. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every mundane object to hold a sinister potential. The air around him grew heavy, thick with an unspoken presence that pressed in from all sides, a cold, silent weight that was more terrifying than any scream. He was no longer just seeing it in his periphery. He was feeling it, a pervasive chill that seeped into his bones, a hum of malevolent energy that vibrated just beneath the threshold of hearing. Sleep became an impossible luxury, a dangerous surrender. Every time Michael closed his eyes, the creature was there. Not just a fleeting glimpse but a looming, indistinct mass in the darkness behind his eyelids. He tried to stay awake, propping himself up with caffeine and sheer terror, but exhaustion was a relentless enemy. He'd drift off for mere minutes, only to be jolted awake by the sensation of something pressing on his chest, or a whisper that seemed to echo from the very walls of his apartment. He'd snap upright, heart hammering, sweat beading on his forehead, only to find the room empty, save for the oppressive quiet and the lingering, icy touch of something unseen. The peripheral sightings intensified, becoming bolder, more aggressive. They weren't just fleeting blurs anymore. They were elongated, distorted figures, darting just past his field of vision with alarming speed. Their forms more defined, their movements deliberate. He'd catch glimpses of what looked like skeletal limbs, or a head tilted at an unnatural angle, the void where a face should be staring directly at him, just outside the line of sight. He found himself flinching constantly, his neck sore from the effort of not looking, of resisting the primal urge to turn and face the terror head-on. He knew with an instinct far older than reason that to truly look, to fully acknowledge its presence with his direct gaze, would be to invite something far worse than fear. His apartment, once his sanctuary, transformed into a suffocating cage. The walls seemed to close in, the familiar objects now alien and menacing. He started noticing things. A book he'd left on his nightstand would be on the floor in the morning, a chair slightly askew, a cupboard door left ajar when he distinctly remembered closing it. These weren't overt acts of violence, but subtle, insidious violations of his personal space, designed to erode his sense of control and sanity. It was a constant psychological warfare, waged in the quiet hours and the lonely spaces of his home. Michael tried to find answers, desperate for any explanation beyond his own spiraling madness. He spent hours hunched over his laptop, his fingers trembling as he typed increasingly frantic queries into search engines: shadow people, creatures in peripheral vision, invisible entities, things that stalk. He sifted through forums filled with equally terrified, equally helpless people, their stories echoing his own chilling experiences. He read about sleep paralysis, optical illusions, psychological breakdowns, but none of it truly captured the profound, malevolent intelligence he felt lurking just beyond his sight. There were no definitive answers, no guides to fighting back, only shared terror and the chilling realization that he was not alone in his torment, yet utterly alone in finding a way out. The creature's presence began to manifest in more tangible ways. The air around him would suddenly drop several degrees, a pocket of Arctic cold forming in the middle of his living room, making his breath mist in the stale air. He'd hear faint scratching sounds coming from inside the walls, like something trying to claw its way out or in. Sometimes a low guttural growl would rumble through the floorboards, a sound so deep it vibrated in his chest, making his teeth ache. He'd clutch his head, his hands clamped over his ears, trying to block out the cacophony of fear, but it was all internal, all around him, inescapable. One evening, as he stood by the kitchen sink, trying to force down a glass of water, he felt it. A distinct icy brush against the back of his neck, like a single skeletal finger trailing down his skin. He froze, every muscle in his body locking up. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, absolute silence of the apartment. He squeezed his eyes shut, a silent plea for it to stop, for it to go away. When he dared to open them again, his vision swam, and for a split second he saw it. Not in his periphery, not a blur, but directly in front of him, reflected in the dark, still surface of the water in the sink. A tall, impossibly thin figure, its form like a ripple in the fabric of reality, its head tilted, and where its face should have been, there was only a deeper, more profound darkness, a void that pulled at his very soul. He screamed, a raw guttural sound torn from the depths of his being, and stumbled backward, knocking over the glass. It shattered on the linoleum, sending shards everywhere, but he barely registered the sound. He was hyperventilating, pressing himself against the far wall, his eyes glued to the sink. The reflection was gone. Only his own terrified, distorted face stared back from the disturbed water. Had he imagined it? Was this the final descent into madness? He forced himself to breathe, to rationalize. It was a trick of the light, a reflection of his own fear. But the icy touch on his neck lingered, a phantom sensation that made his skin crawl. He knew with a terrifying certainty that it hadn't been a trick. It had been a warning. The creature was no longer content to simply be seen or felt. It was asserting its presence, pushing the boundaries, testing his resolve. It wanted a direct interaction, a full acknowledgement. Days blurred into a nightmare of paranoia and sleep deprivation. Michael stopped answering his phone. He let voicemails pile up from worried friends and family, unable to articulate the unspeakable horror that had consumed his life. How could he explain that he was being hunted by something that existed only in the corner of his eye, something that was slowly, meticulously dismantling his sanity from the inside out? They would think he was insane, and perhaps he was. He started barricading his apartment door at night, piling chairs against it, even though he knew deep down that a physical barrier would do nothing to stop a non-physical entity. It was a desperate, futile gesture, a last grasp at control in a world that was rapidly slipping away. He taped black garbage bags over his windows, plunging his apartment into perpetual twilight, hoping that by eliminating the interplay of light and shadow, he could somehow diminish the creature's ability to manifest. It was useless. The darkness only served to amplify its presence, making every rustle, every creak, every shift in the air a potential harbinger of its arrival. The creature's intent became clearer, though no less terrifying. It wasn't just haunting him. It was isolating him, stripping away his connections, his anchors to reality. It wanted him alone, vulnerable, completely exposed. And then it wanted something else. He started having waking dreams, vivid flashes of distorted images that weren't quite memories and weren't quite hallucinations. They were fragmented visions of empty spaces, vast, silent voids, and a repeating symbol, an intricate swirling pattern that seemed to pulse with a dark, inner light. He didn't understand what it meant, but he knew it was connected, a piece of the puzzle the creature was slowly revealing. One evening, the hum intensified, vibrating through the floorboards, through his very bones. The air grew impossibly cold, and the shadows in the room deepened, becoming impenetrable wells of blackness. He stood in the center of his living room, clutching a heavy flashlight, its beam trembling in his shaking hand, the only light in the suffocating darkness. He could feel eyes on him, countless unseen eyes, pressing in from every angle. He could hear whispers, a chorus of sibilant voices that seemed to emanate from the very walls, speaking in a language he couldn't comprehend, yet somehow understood on a primal level. They were chanting his name or something that sounded like it, a drawn-out, distorted sound that filled the room, echoing in his skull. Then, from the absolute blackness of his peripheral vision, a shape began to coalesce. It wasn't fleeting this time, not a blur. It was slow, deliberate, a gradual materialization. He could feel the intense pressure building in his head, a searing pain behind his eyes, as if his mind was being stretched, pulled apart. He wanted to scream, but no sound escaped his throat. He wanted to run, but his feet were rooted to the floor. The creature was no longer content with glimpses. It was stepping out of the shadows, making itself known, not just to his peripheral vision, but to his very essence. And with its full emergence came a chilling, undeniable understanding, a thought implanted directly into his mind, clear as day, yet utterly alien. Asterisk, it was not here for him. It was here for what he carried, asterisk. The words echoed not just in his mind, but throughout his very being, a resonant frequency that vibrated through bone and marrow. Michael stood frozen. The garage air, usually thick with the scent of oil and old wood, now seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. The creature, fully present, was not a monstrous beast of teeth and claw, but something far more unsettling. It was an absence, a distortion, a hole torn in the fabric of reality that somehow held a form. Its edges shimmered, not with light, but with the absorption of it, like a perpetual shadow that defied definition, yet was undeniably there. It was tall, impossibly so, its limbs fluid, shifting, like smoke given malicious intent. And its face, if it could be called that, was a vortex, a swirling void that drew in Michael's gaze, stripping him of any will to look away. He felt no physical pain, no immediate threat of violence, which only amplified the terror. This was a different kind of predator, one that hunted not flesh but essence. The understanding, cold and clear as a winter sky, solidified. It was here for what he carried, but what was it? What could he, an ordinary man, possibly possess that drew such an impossible entity from the shadows of perception? As if in answer, a new sensation bloomed in his chest, a deep, resonant hum that started low and slowly intensified. It wasn't his heartbeat, nor was it a sound from the external world. It was internal, radiating from within him, a warmth that was both comforting and terrifying, like a hidden furnace suddenly ignited. The creature seemed to lean closer, its form undulating, its gaze, the swirling vortex, fixed not on his eyes, but on his chest, on the very source of that growing hum. Then the world around Michael began to warp. The concrete floor seemed to ripple like water, the tools on the workbench elongated and blurred, and the familiar fluorescent lights above flickered, stretching into impossible lines of pure energy before snapping back, only to repeat the distortion. It was as if the creature's full presence was unraveling the stability of his reality, peeling back the layers of the mundane to reveal something else beneath. A fragmented memory, sharp and sudden, pierced through his mounting panic. He was a child, no older than 5, playing in his grandmother's sprawling, overgrown garden. He remembered chasing a butterfly, tripping over a gnarled root, and falling into a bed of soft moss. As he lay there stunned, he saw it. Not in his peripheral vision then, but directly above him, framed by the leaves of an ancient oak. Flicker. A ripple in the air. A momentary distortion that looked like nothing, yet felt like everything. He remembered crying, not from the fall, but from an inexplicable dread that had no source, no name. His grandmother had found him moments later, comforting him, dismissing his frightened babbling about the wobbly air as a bump on the head. He had forgotten it, or rather, his mind had neatly filed it away as a childhood fantasy until now. This creature wasn't just after something he carried, it was after him being a carrier. He wasn't a vessel for an object, he was a conduit. The hum in his chest intensified, becoming a low thrum that resonated with the creature's silent presence. He felt a profound sense of recognition, not from himself, but from the entity before him. It was as if it recognized a part of itself or a key within him. The creature extended a limb, not physically, but as a tendril of pure shadow that seemed to stretch from its form and phase through the air towards him. It didn't touch him, not in the corporeal sense. Instead, it moved into him, a cold, alien presence that slipped beneath his skin, bypassing flesh and bone to reach directly for the source of that growing hum. Michael gasped, a silent scream trapped in his throat. It wasn't pain but an overwhelming violation, a feeling of being probed from the inside out. He felt a sudden, profound emptiness in his gut, followed by a rush of something foreign, something ancient and vast. Images flashed through his mind, not his own memories but disjointed fragments of impossible landscapes, swirling nebulae of colors he'd never seen, structures that defied geometry, echoes of silent, enormous presences. He was seeing through another's eyes, experiencing another's reality, and it was overwhelming. The creature was extracting something, or perhaps activating something. The peripheral vision, he now understood, wasn't just an observation. It was a slow, deliberate tethering. It had been preparing him, anchoring itself to him, subtly shifting his perception until he was ready to fully perceive it. And by perceiving it, he had opened the final door. A dizzying wave washed over him, and his knees buckled. He struggled to stay upright, pushing against the invisible force that was meticulously dissecting his inner world. He tried to fight back, to scream, to move, but his body felt distant, a mere shell animated by the creature's will. The hum in his chest pulsed faster, growing brighter, threatening to burst from him. He felt his consciousness stretching, thinning, pulled taut by an unseen force. Then a voice, not spoken aloud but formed directly in his mind, clear and resonant, yet utterly devoid of human intonation. It was not the thought from before, but a direct address, a complex sequence of concepts and intentions that flooded his awareness. The resonance, it awakens. The bridge, it strengthens. The passage, it opens. The words weren't words at all, but pure meaning, infused with an ancient, patient purpose. Michael understood then, with sickening clarity. He wasn't just a carrier, he was the key. His very existence, his unique frequency, was a living gateway. The creature had been waiting for him, watching him, guiding him, perhaps even shaping him, for this exact moment. The peripheral vision wasn't just a glimpse of the creature. It was a manifestation of the thinning veil between realities, and Michael was the point where it was thinnest. The hum in his chest was the sound of that veil tearing, of the two realities beginning to merge, with him as the focal point. He felt a searing sensation, not of heat, but of pure energy, blossoming from his sternum. It spread rapidly, coursing through his veins, making his entire body vibrate. He could feel his own cellular structure shifting, realigning to some unknown pattern. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer overload of sensory input. The garage was gone, replaced by the impossible landscapes he had glimpsed, now swirling around him in a dizzying kaleidoscope of alien light and shadow. The creature, its form still shimmering at the edge of his dissolving reality, seemed to grow, its presence becoming even more overwhelming. It was not entering his world, it was using him to bring its world here. And the what he carried wasn't a burden but a purpose chosen for him, perhaps even implanted within him long ago. He remembered a recurring dream from his childhood, one he hadn't thought about in decades. He was standing on a precipice, a vast starless void stretching out before him, and in the void a single pulsating light. He always woke up drenched in sweat, a feeling of profound loneliness and longing clinging to him. He had always dismissed it as just a dream. Now he knew. That pulsating light, that void, it was the creature's home. And he, Michael, was the path to it. A final desperate thought clawed its way to the surface of his dissolving consciousness. He had to resist. He had to close the door. But how? How could he fight something that was woven into his very being, something that had patiently cultivated him for decades? The energy within him pulsed, a blinding beacon now. He was no longer just Michael. He was a conduit, a portal, a living bridge. The creature's tendril, still embedded within him, seemed to pull, not on his body, but on the very fabric of his soul, drawing something out or perhaps pouring something in. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. He felt himself being stretched thinner and thinner, until he was no longer a solid form, but a mere point of connection between two impossible worlds. The hum became a deafening roar, the distortion became absolute, and the creature, at the center of this collapsing reality, seemed to smile, a silent, all-consuming smile of ancient satisfaction. He was no longer seeing it in his peripheral vision. He was its peripheral vision, and the passage, it was now fully open. The world, as Michael knew it, didn't just end. It unraveled from the inside out, like a threadbare tapestry pulled taut until every fiber snapped. The silent, all-consuming smile of ancient satisfaction wasn't just a vision. It was a feeling that permeated his very being, a cold, vast joy that echoed in the deepest recesses of his consciousness. He was no longer a man observing an anomaly. He was a lens through which the anomaly observed everything. His vision, his thoughts, his very sense of self were no longer his own. He was the creature's peripheral vision, and through him the passage, now fully open, began to bleed into existence. It wasn't a gate or a door. It was a tearing, a deliberate laceration in the fabric of reality itself. The air in his apartment, once stale and familiar, became a shimmering, vibrating membrane. Colors bled into each other, not in a chaotic swirl, but with an unsettling, deliberate precision, like a painter meticulously blending hues on a canvas, except the canvas was his living room, and the colors were shades of impossible light and shadow. The walls rippled, not like water but like stretched skin, revealing not plaster and paint, but glimpses of something vast and utterly alien beneath. Geometries shifted, angles bending into curves that defied Euclidean space, corners opening into abyssal voids that swallowed light without a trace. Michael felt himself stretching, not physically but perceptually. His senses were no longer confined to his body. He could feel the cold hum of the universe, the distant thrum of dying stars, the silent exhalation of cosmic dust clouds. He was everywhere and nowhere, a point of awareness suspended in an ever-expanding, ever-contracting reality. The creature's smile became a constant, low-frequency vibration in his core, a silent hum of triumph. It had succeeded. It had found its way in. The passage wasn't just in his apartment, it was his apartment and his street and his city. The familiar cityscape outside his window blurred, distorting into a grotesque parody of itself. Skyscrapers twisted into spiraling spires of an unknown material, their reflections in the glass becoming fragmented, multi-dimensional echoes of other realities. The distant roar of traffic became a discordant chorus of alien whispers, a language of clicks and hisses that burrowed into his brain, conveying not meaning but pure, unadulterated dread. He saw the creature now, not as a distinct entity, but as the very essence of the unfolding chaos. It was the shifting shadows that coalesced into impossible forms, the glint of light from surfaces that shouldn't exist, the profound silence that swallowed all sound, only to be replaced by the rhythmic pulse of something ancient and hungry. It was the negative space, the absence of what should be there, that defined its presence. And through Michael it was observing. He tried to scream but no sound escaped. His throat felt like a conduit for something vast and cold, a pathway for the creature's own breath. He tried to move, to fight, but his limbs were no longer his own. They were extensions of this new, terrifying reality, rooted in the creature's boundless perception. He was a puppet, but the strings weren't just attached to him, they were him. A new sensation began to seep in, a pervasive, chilling understanding. The creature hadn't just opened a passage into Michael's world. It had opened a passage through Michael. He was the bridge, the conduit, the living, breathing, screaming gateway. And as this realization solidified, he felt a profound, almost physical shift in the air, a pressure building as if an entire ocean of reality was pressing against a single, fragile membrane. Through his borrowed vision, he saw glimpses of what lay beyond. Not a void, not a dark abyss, but a realm of impossible geometry and non-Euclidean landscapes. Colors that had no names in human language pulsed and writhed. Structures that defied physics floated in a sea of pure thought. And within it all, countless silent, watching eyes. Not eyes like human eyes, but vast, obsidian pools or shimmering, multifaceted surfaces, or even just the impression of observation from every conceivable angle. They were the creature's kin, its extensions, waiting. He understood, with a clarity that threatened to shatter his sanity, that the creature wasn't just an entity from another dimension. It was a breach, a fundamental error in the cosmic code that governed existence. It was the crack in the foundation, the tear in the fabric, and it had been drawn to him, to his specific vulnerability like a predator to a scent. His inability to fully grasp and process the creature in his peripheral vision had been its key, the exact frequency needed to unlock the prison of his reality. The creature's true form, its full manifestation, was still veiled, but its essence was now everywhere. It was in the way the shadows danced with unnatural intent, in the sudden, inexplicable chill that permeated the air, in the faint, almost subliminal whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was in the way the concept of up and down began to lose all meaning, as the ceiling seemed to invert into a shimmering, reflective pool, and the floor became a translucent expanse revealing an endless, starless void beneath. He was drowning, not in water, but in an ocean of alien perception. Every thought, every memory, every ingrained human concept was being systematically dismantled, replaced by something vast, cold, and utterly indifferent. His love for Jessica, his concern for David, his memories of Emily. They were all fading, becoming distant echoes in a mind that was no longer his own. They were irrelevant to the creature, mere ephemeral sparks in the grand, ancient darkness it embodied. The pressure intensified. The world around him groaned, a sound that wasn't heard with ears but felt in the very marrow of his bones. It was the sound of reality itself being stretched to its breaking point. He was a witness to the unraveling, an unwilling participant in the genesis of a new, terrifying epoch. The creature, through him, was not just entering, it was overwriting. He saw his reflection in a shard of glass from a now shattered picture frame, but it wasn't his face staring back. It was a distorted, elongated visage, with eyes that held the cold, calculating intelligence of something inhuman. The reflection smiled, a slow, deliberate widening of lips that weren't quite human, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too many. And in that smile, he saw not his own terror, but the profound, ancient satisfaction of the creature that now inhabited him. That was him. The barrier between worlds was gone. The passage was wide open. And through Michael, the creature began to extend its tendrils, not of flesh or shadow, but of pure, unadulterated influence, into the unsuspecting world. The air crackled with nascent power, an energy that hummed with the promise of transformation, of annihilation. He felt the first subtle tremors outside his apartment, not of an earthquake, but of the very ground beneath the city beginning to subtly, imperceptibly shift. The creature wasn't just here. It was spreading. And Michael, the man who had only ever seen it in his peripheral vision, was now its central nervous system, its eyes, its silent, screaming voice as it began its true work. The world was about to learn what it meant to be seen from the corner of a cosmic eye. The world was about to learn what it meant to be seen from the corner of a cosmic eye. The change wasn't immediate, not in any way that would trigger alarm bells or news headlines. It began subtly, a whisper in the global subconscious, a flickering shadow at the edge of collective awareness. For Michael, or rather, for the entity that now wore his skin and piloted his mind, the first act was one of profound, silent observation. It saw through his eyes, not just his direct gaze, but the entirety of his visual field. Every nuance of his peripheral vision now a high-definition feed to a consciousness that had previously only known the blurry edges of existence. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a lens. The forest outside, a tapestry of greens and browns, became a canvas. And the world beyond, a vast, intricate network of human minds, each one a potential receptor. The creature's true work wasn't about manifesting physically. It was about manifesting perceptually. It was about making its nature, its unseen essence, an undeniable reality for everyone. The first reports were dismissed as mass hysteria, internet hoaxes, or simply the collective stress of modern life. People started sharing stories online, in hushed tones at coffee shops, and with sheepish smiles to their therapists. "I keep seeing things," they'd say, "just out of the corner of my eye. Flicker. A shadow that moves too fast. a shape that isn't really there. These weren't isolated incidents anymore. A young woman named Sarah in Ohio swore she saw a twisted, elongated figure standing in her hallway every time she glanced away from her phone, only for it to vanish when she turned her head. An elderly man, Robert, in Florida, became convinced his reflection in shop windows was subtly different in his peripheral vision, a distorted, almost predatory version that vanished when he focused directly. A truck driver, Mark, driving cross-country, reported seeing impossible geometries forming and dissolving in the desert landscape, always just outside his direct line of sight, like the world itself was folding in on itself at the edges. These experiences, once rare and easily attributed to fatigue or imagination, began to multiply exponentially. It was like a virus of perception spreading through the global nervous system. Social media, ironically, became its primary vector. Threads exploded with millions sharing identical, unnerving experiences. Hashtags like #PeripheralShadows and #CornerOfMyEye went viral, creating a horrifying sense of shared delusion that only intensified the paranoia. Jessica, the theoretical physicist who had once dismissed Michael's claims as fantastical, was now at the forefront of a frantic, global scientific effort. Her lab, once focused on quantum anomalies, was now inundated with psychological profiles, neurological scans, and anecdotal evidence that defied every known law of physics and perception. Her initial skepticism had evaporated, replaced by a cold, dread certainty. The data wasn't just anomalous, it was consistent. Millions of people across cultures and continents were experiencing the same precise, unnerving visual disturbances. Their brains, however, showed no signs of lesions, no chemical imbalances, nothing to explain the phenomenon. "It's not a hallucination in the traditional sense," she explained to a panel of bewildered government officials and neuroscientists. Her voice was strained, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "A hallucination is an individual experience, a faulty input. This is different. It's almost like a shared reality that exists only in the absence of direct observation. It's as if something is manipulating the very mechanism of peripheral vision itself, forcing our brains to perceive what isn't there, or perhaps what is there, but cannot be acknowledged directly." She pulled up a complex simulation, a swirling vortex of data points representing reported sightings. "See here," she pointed. "The density of these reports isn't random. It's like a wave, originating from a single point of inception, then rippling outwards. And the descriptions, the nature of the perceived distortions, they're evolving. Initially it was just shadows, then flickers of impossible color, then fleeting, complex geometric patterns. Now, people were describing shapes, not distinct, identifiable shapes, but amorphous, shifting forms that hinted at something vast, something ancient, something utterly alien. And always only in the peripheral. The moment you tried to focus, it was gone, leaving behind only the lingering echo of profound unease." David, the journalist who had initially mocked Michael's creature in the corner of his eye article, was now a changed man. His cynicism had been burned away by the sheer, undeniable weight of evidence. He was no longer trying to debunk, he was trying to understand, to warn. His online articles, once tinged with sarcasm, now carried a desperate, almost frantic tone. "The world is seeing Michael's creature," he wrote in a widely circulated piece titled, "The Unseen Epidemic." "We laughed at him, we dismissed him as mad. But he wasn't mad. He was merely the first to truly perceive it. And now it seems he's opened the floodgates. This isn't just about what we see, it's about what we don't see, what we're forbidden from seeing directly. It's about a fundamental shift in our reality, a cosmic eye that has finally turned its gaze upon us, not from the front, but from the terrifying, unseen edges of our perception." Fear began to grip society. People started developing elaborate coping mechanisms. Some wore blinders, restricting their peripheral vision. Others refused to look away from screens, hoping to keep their direct gaze occupied. Driving became a nightmare, with countless accidents attributed to drivers swerving to avoid phantom shapes in their side mirrors. Public spaces, once bustling, grew quiet, as people became increasingly afraid of what they might catch a glimpse of when their attention drifted. Governments, initially paralyzed by the inexplicable nature of the crisis, tried to impose curfews, to limit exposure, to offer psychological support. But how do you treat a mass delusion that isn't a delusion? How do you fight an enemy that exists only in the corner of your eye? The creature, through Michael, wasn't just observing anymore. It was learning. It was adapting. It was using Michael's memories, his understanding of human psychology, his fears and his desires, to refine its influence. It wasn't just projecting images, it was projecting meaning. The shadows began to evoke personal anxieties. The fleeting shapes would sometimes resemble loved ones lost, or primal fears, or moments of profound regret. Emily, Michael's ex-wife, was one of the many victims. She had relocated to a quiet town in Vermont, trying to escape the memories and the lingering unease of Michael's descent. But there was no escape now. She found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, convinced she saw Michael's gaunt face, distorted and sorrowful, in the reflection of her window, only for it to vanish when she turned. Sometimes it wasn't Michael, but a monstrous, elongated version of herself, a silent accusation of her past failures. Her once ordered life became a prison of constant peripheral dread. The creature was weaponizing doubt, eroding the very foundation of human consciousness. It was teaching humanity that what you don't see is far more powerful, far more real than what you do. It was forcing a paradigm shift, a brutal re-education in the nature of reality. The world was being groomed slowly but surely to exist within its parameters, to perceive only through its twisted, indirect lens. The air itself seemed to thicken with unspoken questions, with the weight of unseen presence. People started to question everything they knew. Was the world always like this and we were just too blind to see it? Had Michael simply unlocked a hidden layer of reality that had always been there, lurking just beyond our direct perception? Or was this something new, something imposed? The creature, now fully integrated with Michael's consciousness, was like a conductor of a terrifying, global symphony of perception. It wasn't a destructive force in the traditional sense. It didn't burn cities or shatter mountains. Its power was far more insidious, far more profound. It was reshaping the human mind, one peripheral flicker at a time, making the unseen the only undeniable truth. The world was no longer just seeing things in its peripheral vision. It was living in its peripheral vision. And the next stage, the final stage, was about to begin. The world was no longer just seeing things in its peripheral vision. It was living in its peripheral vision. And the next stage, the final stage, was about to begin. It wasn't a sudden cataclysmic event, not like a meteor strike or a global blackout. Instead, it was a subtle, insidious shift, a silent rewiring of the human mind that began, ironically, with a sense of relief. For weeks, the constant flickering, the fleeting shadows, the almost there forms had driven people to the brink. Now, in the final stage, those peripheral disturbances began to solidify. They weren't just movements in the corner of the eye anymore. They were there, tangible, undeniable, but only when you weren't looking directly. Imagine walking down a street. You'd feel a presence beside you, a distinct shape, a texture, even a faint warmth or chill. You'd turn your head, eager to finally confront the thing that had haunted humanity for so long. But as your central vision locked onto the spot, it would vanish. Not just disappear, but dissolve as if it had never been, leaving behind only the mundane reality of the sidewalk, the parked car, the brick wall. The horror wasn't in seeing the creature, but in the profound, absolute certainty that it was always there, just beyond the grasp of direct observation. It was like a cruel cosmic joke played on the very mechanism of human perception. Your brain screamed, "It's right there," while your eyes, when focused, insisted, "There's nothing." This wasn't just a psychological phenomenon anymore. It was a physical one. People started to develop an instinct, a new kind of awareness. They learned to navigate by what they didn't see directly. A mother walking with her child would instinctively steer left, avoiding the dense, unseen mass that her peripheral vision screamed was to her right. A driver caught in traffic would feel the road ahead shift, the unseen forms creating phantom obstacles that forced them to brake or swerve, even though the windshield showed clear asphalt. Scientists, those few who hadn't succumbed to the madness or retreated into catatonia, called it panperipheral perception. They theorized that the creature, or whatever force was behind it, had somehow inverted the hierarchy of human sight. Central vision, once the bedrock of reality, became a filter, a suppressor of the truth. Peripheral vision, once relegated to motion detection and environmental awareness, was now the window to the true underlying reality. Governments, what little remained of them, tried to adapt. Public safety announcements warned people not to trust what they saw head-on. "Look away to see," became the chilling new mantra. Cities installed peripheral light arrays, flickering strobing lights designed to keep the visual field constantly agitated. in the vain hope that it might somehow force the creatures into central view, or at least make their presence less disorienting. It didn't work. It only made the world a kaleidoscope of unseen terrors. The creature thrived in this new reality. It wasn't a predator in the traditional sense, seeking to consume or destroy. Its victory was far more insidious. Consumed clarity. It devoured certainty. It fed on the very concept of objective truth. People began to lose their sense of self. How could you define yourself, your surroundings, your very existence, when the world you directly perceived was a lie, and the truth was forever just out of reach? Relationships crumbled not from anger or betrayal, but from the sheer inability to share a common reality. Emily would swear she saw a grotesque, towering form behind her husband, Michael, only for Michael to insist there was nothing. His direct gaze stubbornly holding on to the illusion of an empty space. The disconnect was unbearable. The creature didn't need to manifest physically to conquer. It simply needed to make its absence in central vision the most terrifying presence of all. It forced humanity to live in a constant state of cognitive dissonance, a perpetual paradox where the unseen was more real than the seen. And then came the next, even more chilling evolution. The peripheral forms started to interact. Not physically, not in a way that could be recorded by any camera or touched by any hand, but in a way that altered the world fundamentally. David, a former architect, was one of the first to document it. He meticulously charted his apartment, drawing floor plans based on direct sight. Then he'd close his eyes or turn his head, and his peripheral vision would scream at him. A wall where there wasn't one, a doorway where a solid surface should be, a chasm in the middle of his living room floor. He began to navigate his own home as if it were a constantly shifting maze. One day he reached for a book on his shelf, only to find his hand passing through empty air. He turned his head directly and the book was there. He looked away and the book, in his peripheral, was surrounded by a swirling, indistinct void. The creatures, it seemed, were not just observed, they were influencing. They were subtly reshaping reality, not by moving objects but by moving perception. They were creating a parallel dimension, accessible only through the corner of an eye, and slowly, terrifyingly, that dimension was bleeding into the one humanity had always known. The final stage wasn't about the creature revealing itself. It was about the creature becoming the hidden operating system of existence. It was about humanity being forced to upgrade to a terrifying new reality where direct observation was a handicap, and the only way to truly understand, to truly survive, was to embrace the world of the unseen. The last bastions of organized society, the military bases, the fortified bunkers, began to experience the ultimate breakdown. Soldiers, trained to look for threats head-on, found their training useless. They'd report enemy combatants appearing and disappearing in their peripheral vision, figures that would never fully resolve, yet still triggered alarms, still caused tangible fear. Supply lines became impossible to maintain as drivers swerved to avoid unseen obstacles, leading to crashes and delays. Communications failed as technicians swore they saw critical components vanish from their peripheral, only to reappear when directly observed, sowing doubt and confusion. The creature didn't need to destroy infrastructure. It just needed to make it impossible to rely on. It didn't need to kill people. It just needed to make them question everything, including their own sanity. The most terrifying aspect of this final stage was the dawning realization that the creature wasn't just in the peripheral vision. It was the peripheral vision. It wasn't an external entity that appeared in the corner of the eye. It was the very mechanism of peripheral sight itself, hijacked, amplified, and turned against its host. It was a fundamental recalibration of what it meant to perceive. Humanity, once masters of their own perception, were now slaves to it. They lived in a world where turning your head meant losing sight of the truth, where focus was a form of blindness, and where the only way to truly see was to deliberately look away. Children born into this new reality were the most unsettling. They didn't struggle with the transition like their parents. For them, the world was always this way. They'd point, not at what was directly in front of them, but at the shifting, unseen forms that only their peripheral vision could grasp. They'd play games of hide and seek, not with each other, but with the creatures, laughing as they almost saw them, their innocence a horrifying testament to humanity's complete adaptation to a nightmare. Sarah, a journalist who had chronicled the early days of the phenomenon, wrote her final entry in a tattered notebook she kept hidden. Her handwriting was shaky, but her words were chillingly clear. "We thought we were looking at something in our peripheral. We were wrong. We were looking through it. The creature isn't a shadow. It's the very fabric of the shadows. It's not the unseen. It's the unseeable unless you don't try to see. And now it's everywhere. It has won not by conquering our world, but by conquering our minds. We live in a world where the most profound truth is that which we can never directly confront. We are forever looking over our shoulders, forever glancing sideways, forever living in the terrifying, beautiful, maddening truth of our peripheral vision. And that was it. There was no grand battle, no heroic last stand. The creature in the peripheral vision simply became. It became the air people breathed, the space they occupied, the truth they could never quite grasp. It was the ultimate mystery, forever just a glance away, forever defining reality by its elusive nature. The world continued, but it was a world reshaped, a world where humanity was permanently tethered to the unseen, one peripheral flicker at a time, making the unseen the only undeniable truth. The world was no longer just seeing things in its peripheral vision. It was living in its peripheral vision. And the final stage had not just begun, it had become the only way to live.